on today's podcast, I thought it would be great to have kind of like an introduction, origin story of who I am for people who follow me. And it would be weird for me to talk. Already it's weird to talk to a camera, but I thought it would be cool to have someone just discuss not so much music, more about life. And so on today's episode, we have Zach Munson. And so you'll see that at one point it kind of disconnects. And so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to timestamp the entire video and you'll know when there's a break. So if you want to watch it, you can watch it. I'll include the audio regardless. So thank you so much. Thank you for being gracious. It's going to get better, I promise. We bought this microphone only after the interview because we realized we could have better audio. And so I'm hyped and excited to see what comes next. So peace. Enjoy today's episode. Zach Munson is an award-winning host and one of the internet's favorite interviewer of some of the biggest artists in the world. He's interviewed people like
Billie Eilish. Hi, Billie. How are you? Louis Capaldi.
Hello.
Hi, Louis. Lauv.
Who's that?
What's up? Dua Lipa.
Thank you.
Alec Benjamin.
Hello.
A few months ago, he reached out to me when he discovered my music and played some of my tracks on one of his Stingray playlists. So when I realized I wanted the first episode of the podcast to be an introduction to who I am, or better yet, an origin story, I immediately thought he was the perfect person to ask, and he kindly accepted. It was a very raw and candid conversation, and nothing was scripted, so his questions were pretty disarming in the best way possible. You'll also be hearing a lot of typical Montreal noises, mainly construction and cars in the background, and the microphone we were using dies at the very end, but you'll soon see that it's probably one of the best parts of the conversation, as it foreshadows what my next few months would look like. So I decided to keep it in anyway. So since nobody's asking, here's the origin story with Zach Munson.
I'm Zach Munson. I'm here sitting in the studio in Montreal with my man Gion, who I just want to say thank you for having me here to kind of chat.
Oh man, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for being here. And when I thought of doing this, there was literally no other person that I wanted to have here. And I thought, this is the closest thing we get to Zane Lau in Canada. And so, you know, and to say, and that's not saying like Canada's inferior. I'm just saying like when I think of you, I think of the same echelon of hosts, of communicators of music, the way I do with Zane Lau.
I really do. And you know, it's been fun for me to kind of discover you these last, I guess, 7 months. It's crazy to think there's only been 7 months. Kind of feels like you've been around for a long time, but interesting to kind of dig into who you are. And 2020 has been such a bonkers time for so many people with so much hate and so much sickness, and yet you have kind of taken this year and come out of the shadows and being able to show yourself as an artist. How many songs have you put out since you started putting out music?
Man,
which is 7 months ago.
Question. I think so. We released the EP on April 4th, so that's 4 songs. April 3rd. Then we ended up releasing I Still Love You on May 19th, Heartbreaks and Birthday Cakes June 25th, and then the new EP that just came out like 2 weeks ago. So I think in total it would be 4, 6, 10, 11 songs plus Drunk on Christmas that just
Drunk
came
on
out.
Christmas, exactly. So 11 songs in 7. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's crazy. You've got 1.3 million streams on Spotify in that same amount of time.
It's insane.
To me, that's crazy, man. Yeah. Considering that, no offense to you as a human being, but like you're a nobody artist. I mean,
if you were gonna say it, I was gonna say it. I'm like, that's exactly the case.
But I mean, that's the case, right? Like as talented and special as somebody can be, you're theoretically a nobody.
Yeah.
What has that been like to kind of see these numbers go up?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have a label.
No.
You don't have a manager. You've got a team of people around you who I would almost just call friends versus anything else.
Yeah, I love that.
So, what is that like for you, seeing these numbers kind of blow up?
You know, honestly, I think the biggest fear that I had when I started coming out with the music was really this fear that like I was gonna put this super intimate, super personal project on the internet. And I don't know if you've seen this, but like on Spotify, like when you have less than 1,000 streams, like there's the less than 1,000 sign that appears in numbers.
Gotcha.
And I was really like, that's gonna be me, that's gonna be me. And this whole like project was in a way like, it almost didn't happen for the fear that I'm going to put this super personal project out. And the only people that are going to listen to this are the people that are directly aware of the exact nuances of how I wrote it, who I wrote it about, what, and all that. So I was really...
your family.
Exactly. I was like, this is perfect. They're like, I disappeared from the internet for 2 years, and I come back with a super intimate project. And so, as the stream numbers kind of were like, they were just at one point like doubling every single month, I was like, okay, thank God, because then there was like this disassociation between like the music and the person. And like the person being like, now it's just music. We don't really know about the nuances of his life so much as it's just like, oh, this is just a song that I like, and that's where I wanted it to be. So to see it, just gradually growing the way it did, it was surreal, and it was more like, yeah, it was just like, what the heck, like this is insane.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong in this list of things that I'm about to say. So between April and November of 2020. Yeah. You have 1.3 million Spotify streams. You get contacted by more than one major record label. You have Canada's top entertainment lawyer want to represent you. Grammy-nominated artists ask you to feature on their up-and-coming album. You're the only independent artist in 2020 to get on the Quebec Billboard. You find time to sneak in filming and releasing music videos. And on top of that, you're almost on your 30p Act 3 name to be undiscovered. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say I'm not 100% sure about the Quebec Raiders. I think I know that I was definitely the only. It was just funny. You know why it was funny? Because I looked at that list when someone sent it to me. I was looking through the list, and I'm like, you see like Sony, you see Universal, you see Warner, the different distributors of that music, and then you scroll down and you see Je ne veux personne, distributor DistroKid. Yeah. It was wild, and you're just like, how did that even happen? And you're like, I have no idea, but I would say those things are pretty factual.
Pretty accurate.
Pretty factual.
With so many things happening in 2020, I want to go. We can talk more about 2020 a bit later, but I want to dig into the kind of before that. Yeah. So tell me about growing up in Italy. Like, you moved to Montreal when you were 3. Yeah. What's your family like? What's your family dynamic like? Brothers, sisters, like what's that deal? Yeah, so we moved here, like you said, when I was 3 years old from Italy. So my dad is a full-on Italian immigrant from Sicily, from a town of 1,500 What's
people.
His name?
Mario. So I know. Okay. Like the ultimate stereotype. Everybody calls him Super Mario. He calls everybody Super whatever your name is.
If my name was Mario, I would insist everybody call me
Super Mario. Exactly. And so my dad is, he comes from that kind of Italian setting, and my mom is an Italian Canadian, born here, first generation immigrant. So and so I actually grew up like being a church kid. Like my dad is a pastor, my mom, and I like to include my mom in that as well, because my dad wouldn't be able to do what he does without having someone. Like we grew up always having people at our house, always. Like my mom's always feeding people. We have people coming, invited, uninvited. For Christmas we would invite all the people who had nowhere to go to celebrate Christmas. And so that was really like how I was raised, which was just like, we do life in community, we love other people, and faith means nothing if it's not expressed in the most tangible and palpable way, which is towards the people around you. Yeah. And so that was really the way I was raised. Pure church boy, going to church like 5 times.
Did you like church? Like when you were a kid, were you like Sunday? Yeah. Or were you like, I'm coming?
That's a good question. I think throughout my life, there was a dynamic that shifted, which was like, I love the idea of God. I love who Jesus is. I'm just not too crazy about the fan club. I'm not too crazy about church. And there was like...
The fan club?
Yeah, I'm
not too crazy about Jesus' fan club.
Yeah, like...
President is just...
Yeah, because I always felt like there was a discrepancy between like my ideology of what Christianity was like versus the practicality of what I saw in community. But I mean, I that never really, like my faith was never like, it was never influenced so much by those disappointments that I had in people, because for me, like my faith in God will not be influenced by how this person treats me, what happens, because that's unaffected. But I did have like problems like in church. Like I was bullied in church. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
By older kids. But this is the thing. When I tell this to my dad, he's also like, but you always answered back, inciting more abuse, because I was never the kind of person that would just take something and just like, okay, like I'm gonna take it I'm gonna take this hit for whatever it is, I always had to answer back. So I would pile on like the animosity towards me.
But what were you bullied about? What were they picking on? Was it you had a weird tooth, you had a weird ear, your mother's middle name was something strange? Like what did they pick on?
I think, generally I've always been antagonizing towards guys for some reason. I don't like, I always, even in high school, like I got along better with girls than I did with guys. And I just felt like maybe because I was very, like my mom raised me to be like, you're the best, like you're the best looking, you're the best. And even though I obviously don't think those things today, but there was like an inner confidence that was built on me that I think for a lot of guys, they felt antagonized by that kind of security. And with my dad especially, like he was very like important in affirming who I was. And when you kind of have that confidence at such a young age versus guys that maybe they're still trying to find out who they are, and I was like, I know exactly who I am, this is what I am, I'm not afraid to, that automatically begins to like invoke a certain reaction with people. But but that whole dynamic with church was really that. It was just like I love Jesus, but I have a hard time with church, and obviously like I have a younger brother and whose experience with church was totally different because he's like the easiest person to love, very like neutral kind of character temperament, and he didn't have the same problems that I did. But we grew up being church kids.
How would your brother describe you as a brother?
Intense, probably. Probably would say that I'm intense, but very like, I don't know. Now I'm talking about myself, but he would say that like, I don't know, Zach. That's a great question. I know what I would want him to say about me.
Well, that's probably not what he would say about you. The question wasn't what would you want him to say about you. How would he describe you as a brother? Okay. And there's no wrong answer. Right?
Okay, I think I'll go with like he probably thinks I'm generous. I'm a generous brother. I'm a loving brother, and I'm an invasive brother. You know,
good combo. Sounds like a brother.
Exactly. Because I'm very like protective over him. I'm very like invested in what he does.
What's the age difference?
4 years. Okay. So he's younger than I am. But I'm very invasive in the sense that I'm like, dude, like you have to do this, you have to do that. Like, how's this going? And I'm very open as a personality and as a character. Like, I love to open myself up to people I care about. He's more like, more introversive in nature, more like, okay, like give me my space. Exactly. And so, but I love him, and as we get older, like he is my best friend. There's no one that I want to be closer with than my own brother, because, like when you grow up, especially the older you get, you realize that friendship is so cyclical. There's seasons of life where you're friends with this person, but family tends to be family all the way through. And so that's like very strong Sicilian culture. Like it's a very strong aspect of the Sicilian culture I was raised in, which is like blood is blood. And so for me, like I feel like if I don't prioritize that friendship, and if that's not the most important friendship in my life, then all the other ones are almost meaningless because I failed in having that relationship with my brother.
You've always been very open and clear about, men being able to express their feelings and emotions, or men being able to cry, which, it's unreal that in 2020 that's even still a question. So, you're living in a house of 3 men and a woman, so who instilled that idea that, it's okay to express yourself and be emotional and feel things? Because there's a lot of testosterone in that house. And again, I'm not religious, right, in any way, but I would assume that sometimes, especially in a really religious Italian home, that might not be the case. I'm sure you knew other families that was not the case at all. So how did you get instilled that?
Bro, these questions are so considered. I love how I'm like, oh wow, this is amazing. So one, I think in large part, like that, obviously it's both my parents. Both my parents, but like my father was so influential in that, because we grew up in a household where it was important to talk about your feelings. And I think it even comes from the fact that he's the youngest of 5 that grew up in a small town in Sicily. They didn't have, like, my grandfather didn't even know what it was like to have that kind of relationship with his kids. But I grew up in a house where it was like, I would come back from school and it was like, how was your day? And I think for 99.9% of parents, they would settle for, it was good, and that was it. But my dad, like, he was so adamant about me talking about how was your day, why was your day good, why was your day bad, why was your day sad. And so we developed this line of communication where it was just like we always felt the need to speak. And when you're talking at a level of frequency that it's daily, where it's not like to open up to you is this emotionally consuming thing because it's so irregular. You know, when the sad moments do come in life, it's easier to express them. But also, I think, you know, most people correlate crying to a negative emotion, right? You cry when something sad happens.
Yeah.
But I've seen my dad cry when things that are good happen as well. And so seeing that, you're not really creating an internal stigma about what crying means to you because you're like, well, crying is just a natural reaction to living this crazy life that we live. And so I've seen my dad cry, and he's not held back, and he's never made me think for 1 second that not being emotional or not crying makes you any more of a man than crying does, or whatever, you know what I mean. But so I think my dad modeled that for me a large way, and then my mom obviously, like, goes without saying, like, it's no poker face in the house. Like, I just saw it, like, there's like. And my mom knows, or my dad knows, okay, he's stressed, or like, and she knows like the different levels of sighs, like my family is able to kind of pick up and see. So we lived in a very open household. For sure.
What does your mother call you? If you sigh, what's the name that she calls you to make sure you're
nameless, just like, just looks, you know. She calls, I don't know, my dad calls me Joe, my mom calls me Gion, and so, so it's kind of, it's funny.
Is your family musical? Like, do you have a musical family? Were there instruments around your house? Like, did your mom play piano? Your dad play accordion? Like,
it depends. My dad plays accordion.
I have accordion.
His name is Mario. He's Italian. He needs to play the accordion. If he doesn't play the accordion, it's not the complete.
Didn't even mean to create that triangle there, but it fits. Yeah.
No, he's not there. I mean, my dad would like to tell you he sings. My mom is actually the best harmonizer I know.
Wow, okay.
So like she's able to pick up on a harmony like so effortlessly, and so she, growing up, actually she would play guitar, she would sing, but I think honestly she's very talented, and I just don't think she had that like level of drive or affirmation around it, which was like, you could do this. But I mean, they're definitely, my mom is definitely music. I'll give that to my mom because she's like an amazing harmonizer.
And when do you remember touching an instrument for the first time?
So like, again, we grew up in church. So like my experience with music was like strictly in a way related to church. So my parents like, he's going to play the piano. Yeah, like let's make John play the piano. And so I remember we would go to piano lessons and I hated it. Like I dreaded it. And in a way, like, it was so indicative of the kind of personality I am and I was since a child, which is like, if I'm not buying in it, like if I'm not buying into it and I'm not convinced personally about something, it's nearly impossible for me to commit to doing that, because I'm such an all or nothing person. Like when I do something, it's either all of me or none of me. And that's like in the best things and worst of things. And so my dad would try to bribe me by giving me ice cream to go to like these piano lessons. Like, well, we're gonna go to Dairy Queen right after. But the thing is, like, even that, like, there's no longevity to that, because first of all, he was a pastor, so we didn't have that kind of money for a banana split every single week. So it was just like,
I mean, you had money for piano lessons.
That's it. And so at one point, I was just like, okay, like we're not gonna play. Like we can't continue this. And
did you like piano and you didn't like someone telling you how to learn it, or was it you didn't like piano as an instrument?
This feels like therapy.
That is what an interview should be.
Yeah.
You should leave this feeling.
That's an interesting, because now that when I compare it to how I learned guitar, the reason why I learned guitar was because I had to teach it myself, and I was learning at the rate that I wanted to learn.
You loved it.
Yeah, and I loved it, obviously. So probably that would come down to the fact that I was like, I didn't want to play certain things, and I had to play those things, and so I guess maybe that is.
It's a super tough line for parents to draw. Where do I push my kid? Where do I not push my kid?
Wow.
Like I took violin from the ages of like 5 to like 7 or something. And then I hated it. My dad let me quit. And I've never let him forget it for 30 years. Because man, do I ever wish I could Tchaikovsky some shit right now, but it's the same with you. It's like, you could have been a concert pianist, but they said no, and yet look where you were. in music, surprisingly enough. You don't drink. You don't do any drugs. despite being this charming, handsome musician, your virginity and your faith go hand in hand.
I love. Okay, let's go.
I try to put it as nicely as I possibly could there, John. So without sex, drugs, and rock and roll, how did you rebel when you were a kid?
I mean, it was tough because I didn't really have a rebellion phase where it was just like, I'm gonna stop going to church and I'm gonna do my own life,
which is a shock, bro.
Yeah.
From a pastor's kid, you'd think.
Yeah. There was.
It's like the Amish going on their Rumspringer. You know, it's like they leave for a little while, go crazy shit, and then they decide to come back or not. And it's I know other priests' kids, and I know they went through insanely difficult times because they got told, no so many times. Thank goodness that's not your case. You seem like there was so much love and understanding in your family.
But I think sometimes in a way, like, my brother did have that phase, so, but I didn't because it was
second
just like,
sibling though. That's a whole other psychological problem.
We should have had Davide here as well.
You have more episodes to come.
But we'll make sure to have you back so you can ask these questions and have them checked by him. But I mean, I think the reason, sometimes I wish I did have that break because it was like whatever hypocrisy I was living out in my life, whatever controversy I was dealing with, it was always within the realms of church. And because again, like from a young age, I just understood that like if my belief in God was never going to be influenced by people. So even if I have a really bad church experience, even if, I don't know, for whatever, it was never going to influence my ability to connect and understand who God is. And so, and also my parents never said like, don't go to, like, you have to go to church. It was like, actually, I want to go to church because this is more about me than it is about you. And so I felt the need from a young person even to this day, like I want to go to church because, it's a beneficial and profitable part for my own life, for my own soul. We're so diligent about taking care of our bodies when we go to the gym, when we're working out and on diets and whatnot. But like, we don't often think about like, okay, what about like the person that I am? What about like for what I say is like the soul of a person, And for me, like, my faith is really my anchor in that sense. But I don't want to also give off the impression of being like this kid was perfect, because I was not perfect. And I was probably, for a lot of church people that grew up in my church, like he was a very chaotic child. He was a very hyperactive. He was always bombastic and all over the place. And he liked girls and whatnot. And so definitely like there was that dynamic to me, but it was harder because I never strayed from church.
Right.
So all those things I lived within the context of being in church. So yeah.
Okay, so why don't we jump to 2011? You go to Dawson College.
Yeah.
This is that time that you're kind of ready to start your life and learn more, and you and your best friend, you fall in love with each other, thus starting this whole saga of what eventually becomes this project and these 3 EPs. So what did you go to college for? What were you taking?
Man, that was a strong intro to that question. I'm trying to like answer this in a way that's like, okay, how do I?
You just
okay.
Super easy.
Good call.
Super easy question. Just what did you like? What did you go to Dawson for? What was your end goal when you were graduating? You thought you would be
Yeah, I thought so from the ages up until 14, 15, I thought I was going to win the World Cup with Italy. So that was my thing.
You're not the only Italian kid to think
exactly.
that. Yeah.
Especially, but the problem is that I didn't, like my dad told me once, he looks at me, Zach, and he's like, look, he's like, you might have the face of a soccer player, but you don't have the feet. And so he's like, this dream needs to end now, and I'm helping you, like I'm sparing you from future disappointment.
I like your dad so much, by the way.
So he had to tell me that straight because he knows, right? I'm super intense, and if I think I'm going to do this, I'm going to put myself entirely into it. But I mean, so my ambition wavered, but I thought the next closest thing was like maybe I could be a journalist, maybe I can go into sports journalism. But coming out of high school, like I thought like, again, I had this complicated relationship with church, and I was like, what if like I start my own church one day, or maybe like there's other people that hated church and I could kind of do something with them and like just create a hub of people that wanted to go to church but hate church, and this
like a like-minded group of people trying to find a community of people to be with.
Exactly. And so I struggled with that because going into Dawson, I was like, okay, like that's what I'm gonna do. And so I wasn't ever really committed to Dawson because of the fact that that was kind of my thing. But my personal life, again, like there was this discrepancy because I wanted to, like, I loved the idea of faith. I loved, like, you know, again, I loved that, but at the same time, like, my life was not reflective of my inner belief. Yeah. And so it was like, there was this separation between, like, my confession of faith versus the practicality of my life lived out in faith.
Because it's easy to believe in God and be a religious person. It's like, but there's also every other aspect of being a human being outside of that little world. So I understand that complication sometimes, and that, like, pull of where do I go? Or is this okay if I still am with this, or is that? Exactly. I totally understand that balance.
But even the Bible says, like, there's this verse in the Bible that says, like, faith without works is dead, which paraphrased in today's language is like, if you talk the talk but you don't walk the walk, then do you really even believe in what your what your inner conviction
don't is. Tell me you love me, show me you love me. Saying I love you, I can say I love you to anybody.
Exactly.
Sorry, I said.
And it doesn't matter.
You can say I love you to anybody, but showing somebody you love them is a totally different.
And that's the same kind of parallel that I would make with faith.
So less than 12 months after starting Dawson College, you're learning all this stuff, you're taking these classes, you've fallen in love, beginning this relationship. You're like, you know what, I'm just going to go to Europe. Why the decision then and there to go to Europe and do that? What was that choice about? What was going through your head when you made that choice?
Yeah, I mean, in some way, like, that decision was made for me. So I mean, I was at Dawson, like, I wasn't in a relationship while I was in Dawson. Okay. So I was just like, my life situation was like, again, I grew like a complete disinterest in my studies because I was like, this isn't even what I want to do. And so it doesn't even matter. And I was like starting to dabble in music a bit. Like, I made this song for like my church convention, and I was like, it was called Stronger, and like in the title was like Stronger Single, but I put the word single in the album cover, so it said Stronger Single. Perfect. And I was getting roasted, like, oh, like you're a strong single, you know. And so I was like, I really like music, and that was kind of like where I was aiming to go to. But I mean, I was missing my classes to watch soccer games when my team was playing, and it came to the point where, like, towards the end of college, like, I was realizing, because of the program I was in, like, I needed to maintain a certain score, and I needed to maintain a certain like, you can't fail more than half of your classes, or else you go put into night school. So like 3 weeks before, like, the semester is about to end, I realized, like, I'm failing most of my classes. So I drank all the Red Bull I could. And I'm just like, okay, I'm going to get this done. I'm going to not fail. Like, I'm not going to go to night school. And the one class that I had to pass, ironically, was gym. Okay? And look at this crazy happenstance that occurs, which is we're playing hockey, I think. And there was this one guy, and he's just like hitting me the whole game. And so at one point, I react and I shove him, and I'm not like a big, tough looking guy. Definitely. I'm actually the least intimidating person that, like, I'm just not that guy. And so I just shove him, and my teacher singles me out, and she's like, Jonathan, get out of the class, go for a walk. And being the answer back person I am, which I always have an answer ready for somebody, I was just like, I'm like, this is 18-year-old me, I'm like, if you want me to go for a walk, I'm not gonna come back. And she looks at the class's teacher, and she tells the class, she's like, I know his type. They always come back. And she said
Gion
that. And knowing that, I'm like, if I don't pass this class, I'm failing. I was like, okay, I'm going to walk out of this class, and I will not come back. Yeah. And so I actually walked out of the class, never came back, failed gym, got kicked out of Dawson College, and hid it from my family. And it was just like one of a terrible point in my life, because, like, dude, it was just a mess relationally. I mean, you're 18. Like, now, like, it was a mess, but now I look back and I'm like, I was just 18. I was just 18 trying to find out, like, trying to discover
who you were and how you to be a human. Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's super hard.
Yeah, and I dramatized it so much in my mind, but now, like, speaking it out for the first time, I'm like, oh, no, I was just 18 as well. I was just 18, which was perfectly normal for me to go through those waves, and, like, and yeah, so that was really...
So you failed out of Dawson.
Exactly.
And you go to Europe for 3 years to do what?
okay, so maybe there's just one more thing. So I hid it from my parents.
Yeah, I was hoping there was an in-between there.
I hid it from my parents, and at that point I'd lost my license, my newly acquired license. So I lost my license, got kicked out of Dawson, and or was about to lose my license. And for some reason at that point in time, there was like my best friend who I confided these things to, and my 12-year-old brother, or 13, 14, my 14-year-old brother that I confided these things to, he was actually 13 at the time. And so these are my two confidants. And so and one day my brother's playing his game, and we get in a fight, and so he uses this point vindictively to tell my parents about everything that I was hiding. I was at work, and I was working at this soup kitchen in front of my church, and my dad calls me and he's like, when you get home, we need to talk. And in that moment I knew that it was like, this is game over, like they found out, and David must have told my dad, and so I'm at this soup kitchen, and I'm just freaking out, and I'm like, the only thing I would want to do besides Dawson would be to go to to study theology. I want to go, maybe I could kind of get an education so that I could start a church or work at a church one day. And so my dad calls me, and I'm just like immediately like downcast. Like I knew like it was over. Yeah. And this lady from my church shows up, imagine, and she's like, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, oh, church people are so like invasive, and they're so annoying, and they want to know everything about you. And she's like, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, honestly, my life is a mess, and I don't know what to do anymore, and I want to go study, theology, but I can't because we're broke and whatever. And she just looks at me. This is like this Ukrainian lady in an Italian church that I've had 3 conversations with my whole life, and she looks at me and she's like, well, do you think God could do anything? And I'm like, yes, I think he could do anything. I just don't think he's going to do anything for me. And so that was the extent of my conversation. And so I go back home, and my dad has this conversation with me and my parents, and I'm expecting this like this is my inner narrative, which is like, you idiot, you screwed up, why did you do this? But my parents there was no evidence in the way that they treated me my whole life for me to think that was the kind of reaction that kind of warranted me not saying anything to them, But in that moment, it was just like, look, we love you, son, and we just wish we would have been able to help you earlier on if this was how you felt about school. And so, like in a way, you're actually expecting that it was like this, because that would have been easier to deal with than this super graceful response. And so that night, I go to the movies with my friends just to leave the house, and this Ukrainian lady that I met at the soup kitchen calls my dad, and she's like, Pastor Mario, we need to speak, it's urgent. My dad's like, okay, like usually urgent means somebody died, like he's a pastor.
He has to do stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And so she's like, we can meet tomorrow morning. And so he ends up meeting with her, and she's like, God placed on my heart to pay for Jonathan's Bible education. And so if he wants to study, if he wants to go to Europe, whatever he has to go, I'll pay for all of it. And it was so shocking, because at the same time, and I get almost like emotional talking about it. This lady lives in Saint Michel. She's not part of a wealthy area of Montreal. There was no financial backing in a way to kind of allow her to do that. But, for her, it was like she felt like God put that on her heart, that, she wanted to give this opportunity to somebody, and it was like confirmed that it was me. And so the fact that I was at that soup kitchen that day, that she was there, and she pulls out this empty checkbook, and she's like, look, whatever he needs, he's going to be covered for 3 years. And my dad is like looking at this, and it's almost like there's this disbelief that this happened.
Like, what are you asking for?
The same day that he finds out, like there's this like alternative path, which is like, here, look, this is what you have to do. And so, thanks to this lady, and obviously my family in Sicily, who also helped, because there's more than education. There's, as you know, other things. I was able to go study a year in Rome and 2 years in Brussels and Belgium. And that was really thanks to that lady that enabled that to...
Unreal, man.
Yeah.
Most people don't get that opportunity at all.
At all.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and her generosity really changed my life, because through that school, like, I was able to understand someone who felt so disenfranchised by church without, withstanding the fact that my dad was a pastor, that I was going to church, and I always felt like, I don't connect. It gave me the knowledge to be able to speak about my faith in a way that doesn't freak people out. And above all, like, it taught me the importance of living out a model of what you believe before you have to preach it. And I don't really try to like preach to people who listen to me or to friends, and because I really believe the importance of like, if you're close to me long enough, if you're friends with me long enough, you're gonna see that there's some discrepancies between like what people do and what I try not to do. And I think even like whether it's Jules or whether it's Jason or anybody else that's on the team, like they'll know that there's certain lines that I don't really like to cross, and it's not like I'm gonna start saying this is sin and don't do this, and it's just like I have this inner conviction that's based on my faith, and it makes me not want to act a certain way.
Sure.
Not like I can't do this. It's just like, I don't want to do that because that's not who I am. And it doesn't mean that I don't, relapse and I do things that I don't want to do because that's what it means to be human, right? But it's also just learning like, this is how, and that's what school is.
We were talking about before, it's not exactly the same, but you know what I say. It's like all the time on social media, I just say be less of a dick than you were the day before, And it's the same thing goes for this kind of situation. It's like you can never be so hard on yourself that you can't forgive yourself for something.
Wow.
As long as you're trying to find that path to be a good human later.
That's massive.
You can't be so hard on yourself, man.
And that's the thing, like, there's so much guilt and shame that is within a faith and a lot of faith systems, and it's so counterintuitive to what faith is, especially in a Christian context. Mm-hmm. We live with so much shame and so much guilt, and I went through a massive depression in 2018 to 2019, and it was all geared about guilt and shame and regret, and it was just like, again, like, we had this feeling of like we do something wrong and we're so like ashamed of what we did, and so but the thing is, like, shame never brings us closer to being the person that we want to be.
Yeah, right. Definitely.
It just actually puts us in a hole, and it disables us from ever growing beyond it. So
but good for you for having that mentality, man. That's not easy to have. So while you're away, you've got this relationship going in Montreal. You're like coming back once a summer. I think you had mentioned seeing it. Yeah. So that you come back after Europe, and then what is life like once you come back?
Yeah, so I mean, when I left Montreal for Europe, I was just very close with a person, and I just told her, like, I don't really know what the next 3 years of my life looks like. I just know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. And it was just like such a mature love, almost like too mature for my ability to actually understand it. And so it was like, for me to protect that relationship, like I was like, let's be a secret relationship for a year, just because I don't want to really want to compromise your reputation by being with me, and I'm not perfect, and so it was like a secret relationship for a year, and then from there we kind of like, so for 1 year secret, and then after we came back, and it was like I wouldn't have been able to go through the 3 years of living in a different continent away from my family had it not been for her in a lot of ways,
So you come back, things have been going well, and you decide you're going to live your life, and you're going to get this job, and you're going to do whatever, and then you come back from Europe. You've got your life planned out, and then it doesn't quite go that direction. Yeah. You're in a secret relationship.
I mean, so it doesn't. In 2017, I released a song with a very close family friend of mine who's famous in Italy, and he was kind of like always poking me with my voice. He's like, you need to do something with your music, you need to do something like, and so he's like, come up with a song and I'll release it and we'll do something. And I was like, okay. And so I wrote a song. Like in 15 minutes, I had like some friends of mine that are producers. We worked on this idea, and it was just like, okay, this is perfect. And it was like a typical summer like dubstep kind of song, which I cringe to this day watching it. But so we had that, and it comes out. It goes like viral on YouTube. Like it goes, it's doing very well. And like 2 days into it, I'm like, I hate this. I'm like, this is like, I had to go to California to shoot the video with a bunch of, like influencers, and it was so cringy when I think back to it, because it was such a almost out of body experience, because it was so different from who I was as a person. And I guess that kind of really set me on an emotional path or trajectory where like things began to change for the negative in me and myself. And obviously that permeated into the relationship, and it culminated, because at the same time, like I was working at a church, right? And so it was like, this guy who's working at a church comes out with a song and he's filming it in California, but he's like, there was like this huge like dichotomy, disconnect exactly, of like, wait, he does music, but now he's also like in church, and so that kind of just set me on a
but which is also not fair.
Yeah.
That's not fair for anybody to put on you ever. Because you should be able to be...
Yeah. But I guess that's... Yeah.
As long... For me, it's like, as long as you were, like, getting wasted in the video.
Yeah.
You know? It's,
but, like, I guess for, like, you know, my people my age, like, yo, that's amazing. Like, my youth pastor does that. That's crazy. But, like, at the same time, like, you're a pastor, and there's kind of, like, there's like a level of morality, a level of conduct that is rightfully expected of you, and so doing something like that kind of like, you know, kind of puts you out there, and like obviously not in a positive way, and so that kind of just set an internal like trajectory within myself where things were being changed and not in a good way, and you know, and it creates gaps, and I think you get to an age where it's really like. But my dad would tell me, like, look, you're of a certain age, like you need to offer the whoever person's in your life a certain stability, and if you're not able to offer that, that's gonna jeopardize your relationship in the long term. And I think that's exactly what it did. And you know, I made some mistakes that cost me the price of my relationship that obviously transcended just the music video. And so within a very short period of time, it was like I stopped working at church. We broke up, and it just really created this negative space for me. And it was just like, because in such a short period of time, like all the foundations that I built my life on, which was, you know, like I'm going to be a pastor, I'm going to do this church, you know, I had this miraculous story of this Ukrainian lady paying for my biblical education, and like everything is this is like, I am like the chosen Messiah of Montreal, you know, like, and that was really like this thing I was building to. And within a few days, like I lost everything. So I lost the job, I lost my relationship, I lost the future. And I was really at like ground zero, and full of shame and full of like guilt and regret for what I did and there was no way of reconciliating that, you know.
So at what point do you take this negative space that you're in, this like in your head what could be the worst period of time in your life? How do you take that and you decide to turn it into music? How does that start? Do you just start writing poems? Is it journals and you accidentally hum a melody yourself? Or are you purposely saying, you know, I'm going to write an album? Or are you just giving yourself some therapy to sing a song on the guitar? Like, where was your head at in the creation of these songs?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I started going to therapy. So I was going to therapy to process this experience. And it was difficult because I'm a very driven personality. So I'm very like, if you tell me, John, like I need you to do this, like I will go through walls to do those things. And I never wanted therapy to be like me telling you how I feel, because I have two parents that know exactly how I feel, know exactly all the nuances of that. So it's just like, I wanted to go to therapy and be told what to do. And so it was like, instead it was like, no, it was like me telling you how I feel, but you're psychoanalyzing, being like, you have these patterns and these trends in your life, and this is why you did this. And it was just like, oh my God. And so once I did that, it gave me a mental clarity to understand and to let go of certain things, and understand that like there was some things that I wasn't going to be able to will into existence. I wasn't going to be able to resurrect things of my past, no matter how hard I held on to those things. Like there was a certain period of my life that I was really just going to have to learn to let go. And so once I began having that mental clarity, like I began writing music, but strictly for myself, like just writing music the way like some people go out for drinking or go out doing whatever process their emotions. Like for me, it was just like, I'm just going to write music for myself. Like this is just going to be a way of me dealing with what I'm dealing with. And so I built up like this catalog of songs. Now I'm calling it catalog now, but that wasn't in my vocabulary back then. But I was just processing like what I was going through, and it was like I would go through therapy, and like this thing like lit up in my head, and it was like, oh my gosh. And so I would write these things in a way to like chronicle the period that I was in. And so after that, it was just like, a year, I began working at the bank. I know it sounds so like, you're looking at me like, how does this guy work at a bank?
I saw you, I thought you worked at a bank. That's kind of it.
But I started working at a bank. I started a company, and I was like, I'm going to build my life in a way that I don't really need to be working in a church. I'm going to build my life in a way that, like it could be bigger than that. And like, you don't have to feel like there's that emotional baggage and correlation and relationship with what church is. And so I did these things, and it was like after a year where I gave the space that I felt like was required. A year after I gave the space that I felt like was required, I just came to terms, and we met one last time, and I was like, okay, like it's done, like it's over, like like you need to let go of a future with me, and in that
you
moment,
said that to her,
no,
or she said that to you?
No, she said that to me. Because again, like I was gonna hope till the very end. I was gonna hold on to whatever hope I had that the relationship would rectify itself.
So out of that, you've created these what will be 3 EPs.
Yeah.
Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Is there like this tiny little part of you that thinks that if you just like nail this perfectly, that you get her back?
Oh my gosh, Zach. I think that was my emotional posture the first time around.
Yeah.
That was like, she's gonna hear this.
Yeah.
And
how could she not?
Exactly. Right. And like, when you realize like, no, like that's not gonna be the case, and this isn't gonna win her back, and this isn't gonna fix again. God like reaffirming, like if you're really letting go of this, you're gonna need to learn to let go of it with both hands, not like clenched fist. And so I think at the beginning it might have been like that, but it didn't end up being like that.
I feel you, bro.
Ultimately.
It's like trying to sit there and be like, if I craft this Instagram DM perfectly, that's it, I win.
That's it.
If I make this album, how could I not get the shit I lost back?
And it's so funny, it's so well said, because a part of me always likes to believe that I could control the outcome of my situation.
Yeah, of course.
Because I was never raised with a victim-like mentality. I wasn't raised to think that like if something goes wrong, this is your fault. This is your responsibility. If you're being bullied, it always falls on you at the end of the day. And so that has its pros and many cons, but a part of that creates this inner narrative within myself that like if I do X, Y, and Z, if I do this perfectly, then I will be able to redeem, or I will be able to restore.
Or fix.
Exactly. And it's just not the case, and it just pushes this like, understand like I'm not God,
I mean, good. I'm glad after all this time you finally realized that's
this moment.
this exact moment. And how did it go from your personal project to actually being music? I mean, you met a producer. How did that come about for you?
Yeah, so I started this social media company where I was taking care of branding, I was helping with marketing, I was doing photography and videography. And so one of these companies was Godin Guitars. And so I had to shoot some new guitar models that came out that day. And I called a friend of mine who was a guitarist. I'm like, hey, do you think we could like take some pictures of you playing these guitars? And he's like, yeah, sure. And so he's like, do you think I could bring 2 other friends? And I'm like, yeah, like the more the better. It's going to be an easier job if I have 3 people taking care of And so they come, and out of those 3 people, one of them was my producer, Kevin. And so we're done finishing the pictures, and we're apparently very close to the studio. And one of my friends, Brian, who's my guitarist now, he's like, oh, Kev, by the way, John, like he does music, he does his own kind of thing. And Brian's reference was like the song that I did that made me cringe so much.
Dubstep,
Yeah, but he still knows that like I did music, or I was singing in church. Yeah. And Kev's like, oh, come by the studio, why don't you play something for us? And I was like, oh, no. Like the only song that I had was just like, no, I can't do that. And so Kevin insists, he's like, I want you to come. And so I go to the studio, I just play one song of like the many songs that I had written at that point. And it was really quiet, and Kev just looks at me, and no one's saying anything in the room, and I'm like, oh man, I must have just really done badly. And Kev looks at me and he's like, are you working with anybody? And I'm like, I'm working for people, I'm not working with anybody. And he's like, no, but I mean like musically, do you have a producer or anything? I'm like, no man, like I don't have anybody, I just have songs. And in my mind, like at that point, I wouldn't, even to this day, I struggle with like, I'm a songwriter, like no,
You just write.
I just write things, yeah. And so Kev was like, why don't we make something together? We can make a project together. And I told him from the beginning, I'm like, yeah, but I don't think I would release this music. And he's like, well, it doesn't really matter if you release it, just make it, and whatever happens, happens. And so whatever happens, happens. Like for 8 months making songs, and like my only social activity was like work, music, work, music. And that was my only really like, for 2 years, like I excluded myself from every possible social gathering. It was really like just work 1 year of all work, and the next year would be like, how am I going to make this music thing? And you're putting so much work into it. You're kind of like, you know, like, am I going to release this? Because now I'm putting a lot of time into this. And
he knew.
And, and Kev just like, just one more track. Let's just kind of continue doing this. And like, you're on a roll. Like, the song's getting better. And I'm like, okay. And so the first song I ended up doing was Love You Since College. And that was like
crazy, man. I mean, it's becomes the title of the first act. The first EP becomes the title track of the song, and within this collection, the first words we hear off the first song, off the first EP, which I just love so much, was just "Change your name, my phone today," which I think sets such a clear tone for everything else that you're about to hear in the project. It sets you up. It's like that perfect opening scene of a movie where you kind of find out what already happened and then actually find out what actually happened. So what was that like? Because I'm picturing you sitting on your bed, like staring at your phone, being like, do I change this pet name to her like Christian given name? Or like, do I, you know, it's like, what do I use her middle name? Like, what do I do? What was that feeling like for you? Because again, I think I said to you, it's like changing somebody's name in your phone from that like loving pet name to the real name is like taking off your ring after a divorce. It's like, I know people who are divorced who still wear the ring. They just can't quite do it. And it's such a cutting off point. Sure. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, you said it perfectly. It's like changing the name on somebody's phone. Changing the name of somebody on your phone is the Gen Z equivalent to taking your ring off, right? And it's because there's like this instant disassociation that you're making, that whatever name you've attributed to this person, they're no longer that. Yeah. And you're like, and it was just such a distinctive moment that I was like, wow, like today was the day. And it wasn't even as it happened. It was 6 months too late. Yeah. Meaning like, this is dead, this is done, this is over, this is finished, and I still can't come to terms with freaking like just changing the.
It seems like such a small thing, but it is a huge thing. It is a huge thing.
I appreciate the way you frame that.
It's. I think it's one of those things that isn't deep and is also so deep, and I think everybody now with a cell phone can kind of understand exactly what you're about to say. So that EP comes out April. Yeah. Then November, we get your second EP, I Hurt You, I Don't Deserve You. Your second EP in 6 months. What's your favorite song off that EP?
Oh, man. I mean...
Favorite's a big word. Yeah. It doesn't even have to be your favorite. Pick one and talk about it.
Okay, I think the most laborious, is that a word? Mm-hmm. The most laborious song to make was I Hurt You, I Don't Deserve You. Yeah. And I had the title of that song before I had the lyrics of that song. Yeah. And because that for me was like the overarching theme of what I was dealing with, which was like this concession of like, whatever I did disqualifies me from the privilege that it is to love you. And so that was like a big thing that also I learned in therapy, you know? And so like this term of this understanding of like, okay, like I can't win you back. I can't will my way back to your heart. And so now all I could do is really step back and just appreciate what kind of person you were. Appreciate all the things that you were to me, and just understand that like this is the way it happened, but it doesn't change the fact that, you know, you were a grace to me. You did love me so patiently in all of my highs and lows. And not to recite my own lyrics, but
I mean, that was lyrics. Yeah,
that was a sentiment, and there was like 4 different versions of that song. And it was just like, it would never felt right. And all I had was really the chorus, which was, you have every right to feel the way that you feel. I can't change your mind. I know that it's all surreal. Do what's best for you, you know? And that was all I had. And the verses never felt right. And it was the last song to be added. So imagine, I settled on the fact that it was going to be called I Hurt You, I Don't Deserve You, except the song that was called that wasn't finished yet. And so I remember it was like 3:30 in the morning, imagine, in the studio with Kevin. And we made like a hip hop version. We made like a drop electronic version. It's just like, oh, no, it doesn't. That's not what it has to be. And so I told Kev, I'm like, okay, like let's scrap everything we did, and just let's try to make something from scratch. And Kev took something I was playing on the guitar, and he just went on the piano. So like already, I always make music with a guitar, never voice only, never. Yeah. That's like my safety zone. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't even have my guitar that day, so I had to just depend on what Kevin was playing on the piano. And he plays this little thing, and like I was thinking like, what's the first thought? And it was really like, you were a grace to me. And for me, like grace in my faith, in my context, it's just this, it's being the recipient of something that you don't deserve. You know, it's something that goes beyond meritocracy. Or it's beyond something that you could fight to receive. Grace is something that's freely given. And so looking back, if you look even the word grace, it comes from the Greek word which means gift. And like that was my way of saying like you were a gift to me. And the second that line came, everything just kind of like, everything was done within that same night. And we didn't leave the studio before we recorded the entire vocal scratch for that song, because everything just like a waterfall, you know, it just came down and it was just like, this is that song.
It's amazing, man. It's amazing how those things can happen, how you can fight so hard for something and want it, and then simple little thing can change your whole mindset on something. Unreal, man. I find it amazing how, you know, we're in this 2020 COVID, stuck at home, don't see anybody world, and you've still managed to connect with fans. You can't see them at a show. You can't do a show. You can't do a meet and greet. Here you are, you know, selling out 150 or whatever the number was, pieces of merch and like the snap of the finger. What's it like for you knowing that like you're a Montreal artist, you haven't done any shows, you haven't toured, and you sold more merch in Australia than you did in Montreal? Like, what is that? What is that? Again, it's like seeing that 1.3 million number over such a short amount of time. What's it like knowing that, you know, more people in Australia bought your merch than Montreal?
I mean, that's a great point, and I think for me it was.
I mean,
really
maybe
like,
they all just love that first dubstep track you put.
That's
you don't know.
That's
maybe,
it. Back from
maybe it's just
2017.
Like
But I mean, I look at it like a lot of artists are obviously vexed about the situation, but I'm not even vexed because I was born into this, so I don't really know the difference of what it means to do those things, because this is what it is and this is my reality, and my reality is online. And so there's not a part of me that's like, oh man, like I can't do anything, because it's just like, well, A, I don't expect anybody to care about what I do, and then two, it's just like, at the end of the day, this is my reality and this is what it means. And I always say, like, hopefully, like I'm reaping, you know, I'm like sowing seeds into what eventually will be tours and what will eventually be shows in person. And I feel like that's why the work that I do now is so essential to being able to reap that harvest into the future.
100%.
You know, and I think even with fans, like, you know, this is my opinion. Like I have a weird relationship with that word, because I feel like it sets like a weird dynamic between the artist and the consumer of the music, or the listener. And you know, for me, like when I get reached out, like I always get Instagram DMs and I always try to answer them, especially when they're so considerate and so specific. But for me, like I look at it like that's a person that I'm connecting with, and when I deal with those people, like I think of them as friends. I don't think of them like I'm this like cool, because I'm not that, you know. And I'm like, I look at it like these are friends of mine that I'm making through the music. And so that's the kind of dynamic I have with them, which is why maybe it's more genuine and more invested, because they don't look at me like an artist. They unfollow, they follow, they unfollow. They look at it like, oh, I'm making an emotional investment into this person.
What can people kind of get excited about for 2021? There's like Act 3, and what else can come? Like, do you have the idea of a show? Are you close to signing a record deal? Like, where are you in your life for the next 12 months? I feel like in your head you've planned out the next 36, but you can only focus on the next 2 weeks. What's that like for you right now?
You know, I think right now, like I'm just concentrated on building equity within the community that I have. You know, I'm building that value, and those are the things like, you know, I always try to be transcendent of circumstances, or better put it, more frankly put it, I hate being hostage in situations. So like, I'm never gonna wait on a label to sign me to make music. I'm never gonna wait on a management company for me to be able to begin doing what I wanna do. And the big reason for that is just because like I genuinely love doing this, and to think that I wouldn't be able to do something because I have to wait on this person or on that person.
Anybody else.
Yeah, exactly, but me. So, you know, in a way, like, if I don't have any press, it's fine. I'll make a podcast and have the best possible person to interview me to say the things that I would want to say, because that's the kind of personality I am. I'll always try to build an infrastructure around me that gives me the opportunity to do the things that I want to do. And so, yeah, like, for me...
Are you concerned? Is there a concern of like you being in this position right now, you doing so well for yourself in so many different aspects, and going to like talking to labels, finally signing something, and you're like legally bound to do certain things. You're legally bound to be a certain person or put out a certain number of albums in a certain amount of time. Like, are you worried that that is just going to crush your creativity and you're going to have it in a dark hole and then you won't get it out for 5 years until you crawl in that hole? Like,
this is going to sound so cliche,
yeah.
but there's a genuine part of me that feels like I was built for this.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like every experience of life that I've had, every friendship, every relationship, every moment has culminated into this season of life for me. And so, you know, when I say I know what the next 4 albums are going to sound like, that's because I wouldn't sign with a label or I wouldn't sign with a management company that doesn't acknowledge that vision and doesn't acknowledge that, you know, I can make a pop song, I can release a single, but I'm more conceptual than I am one-offs. And so even now, like, I'm trying to build that culture within my following, which is like, it's long format content. It's not just 1 2-minute and 52-second song that we're going to listen to. No, it's going to be like a story that's being told. And so, you know, maybe there is that concern, but at the same time, I think it would be very difficult for a label or for a management company to sign me and not concede to the fact that this is how he is and this is how he's always going to be. You know, and like obviously, like I think John Mayer signed a 10-album deal when he did his first deal, and maybe from the outset that's like a ridiculous, but I would love to do something that long. Because I'll tell you why.
It's not sign a 10-album deal.
But
okay, please. No, promise me now.
I promise.
You will not sign a 10-album.
I promise. But I'll tell you why. Because it gives you the assurance, in a way, whatever assurance means in this industry, that you're going to be able to tell a story in this many ways and chapters. It's like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm a big superhero fan. We should have started the conversation. I am like, dude, I've watched every movie that comes out. I'm a fan.
A long game strategy of universes.
But the thing is, the Marvel Cinematic Universe would have never happened had it not been for the years and years and years of emotional investment people built into those movies.
Absolutely.
And when I watched Endgame, I watched it the first showing, the first night it came out, okay?
Yeah.
And I'm there and I'm watching it and when Captain America comes, you know, and when he says like when he's like on your left, when Falcon says on your left, and like, you know, all the characters come in, and then when Thor picks up like the shield, Captain America's shield, like I was in cinema at this time, and people got up and started cheering and they're yelling, and I'm like judging these people. I'm like, oh my gosh, you know. And then I'm judging them while standing up. Why am I standing up? Because I'm cheering too. Yeah. And this eclectic moment of everybody like reacting for what is a fictional story basis, it showed me like the reward of long-term building. And it kind of opened my eyes that if I treat my music like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, if I place Easter eggs and heartbreaks and birthday cakes that are revealed within the album and then even fulfilled in albums that come, then the payoff for those songs is going to be so much higher because I set a precedent from albums and songs before. And so that's the way I treat the music that I'm doing. Like, I don't want to build a single, I don't want to make a single, I want to create a Marvel Cinematic Universe with my music, and the level of investment from the fans, not the fans, the listeners, or the
your friends,
my friends, will be that much higher because they'll be like, oh my gosh, he mentioned that in that song, and now it came out in the 30p, you know? And so that's the way I kind of see it. And so, you know, if that's a possibility, then great, I would love to, but at the end of the day, like, my premise is this, like, nobody owes me anything, Jesus gave me everything. If it all ends today and like, you know, this is the extent of what I'll do, then I'll be like, thank you, I'm so grateful I had the opportunity to do what I have to do. And so I try not to have too much of an expectation with the people that I'm dealing with in these conversations, because I realize how fickle it is. You know, one day, like, this person wants you, the next day that person wants you, that person wants you, and then so what? I put all my stock into the hope that you found that I could be the next, so forth. Only for that not to happen. So for me, it's just like I'm just gonna keep my head down, work really hard, and just create an infrastructure where if I get that opportunity, then amazing. But I don't want to be dependent on an opportunity that might never even come my way. You know?
Man, I think, you know, you've done so many great things in such a short amount of time. You really should be so incredibly proud of that. And I think the things that you have to think about for the future for yourself are, remember,
give me some insights to pitch to me right now.
It's just like, remember this. Remember what you did by yourself for 7 months or 2 years or whatever it was. You did this by yourself. You don't have to have a manager. You don't have to sign a record deal tomorrow. Like, if you don't feel good about any deals on the table, don't sign them. You're still going to be the same dope artist a year from now, probably better. It's like, you know, it's like, who was it, Michael Jordan? Getting a like $10 million check, hand to him, and be like, well, if this guy wants to hand me $10 million right now, imagine what the guy is going to want to hand me after this one. Right? So don't jump in and sign the shit.
But tell me something, okay? So let me ask you, please, because I know that when we're speaking first on Instagram, I think you asked me, like, is there like, are you gaining like traction? Like, are people asking you? Because you know that was your question, and I was like, yeah, people are. And like, don't sign. And my question, like, I guess, as an independent artist, and I say independent, and I do this alone, but again, I'm blessed to have Kevin, I'm blessed to have Julian, because those are like my 2 core guys that compose what I've done, and without them, I wouldn't have been the same. But like from an independent perspective, right? Like, you go broke making this music, into making this, and the only reason why I'm able to do this is because these people become friends, and they're giving me the leeway and the grace to like grow into the funds that I'm spending. But from an independent standpoint, like, what are the dangers that an independent artist blindly goes into wanting to sign it, because they put a lot of money in front of, like, this is what you're going to be able to do, and you're like, oh my gosh, that covers all the debts, that covers all the
right. And what about after that?
Yeah, so tell me.
What's
your hesitancy? Because I know you're 4 artists.
My hesitancy is like, I don't want to talk shit about record labels as a whole, because I love record labels. They do a lot of good for a lot of people, and in 1950, they were an absolute necessity. But a record label is just a business. The record label is going to sign 150 artists in the same local community who potentially could be the next whoever. Because once they've signed it, let's say they sign you for, we want 3 albums from you, we're going to give you a $20,000 advance, that's going to cover it. And young artists who are 18, 16, 15, if they want to sign an 11-year-old and the mother signs off, like that's a record deal. You know? You get excited by like, oh my God, I got a check. I've never seen a check. No one's ever given me a check for my art before. But they own everything you do. They have final say on that. Where's that song you were supposed to get me? It's like, you really thought that 3rd album was going to be about this? Well, no one wants to hear that. Right? Like the stuff that you're already being told, right? You're not this enough. You're not enough of that, or you're too much of this. That only gets worse as you get bigger. The more eyes and ears the label thinks are on you, the more they're going to fucking worry about that shit.
Wow.
But remember what you've done by yourself. You did this by yourself. They didn't help you with this at all. None. So don't rush into shit. Like, lawyer, get it. You need a lawyer, like, collaborations, fucking great. I know you're still considered for the choice, but like, you don't need, like, look at Chance the Rapper, man. I mean, he's not the example, he's really the exception, but like, is he even on a label now? I still don't even think he's signed now, right? Someone's like, he's Chance the Rapper. So we're in a world where you don't need them. You need them at a certain point. Like, you want to put on like a stadium tour, that's like a team, but it doesn't even have to be.
But tell me something. Yeah. Like, something that I've learned is that I feel like the industry is kind of incestuous in the sense that, like, it uses itself to proliferate itself. Sure. So it's like people that work with labels could also work with distribution people. And so for me, like, I think what one person was telling me is kind of like, you're like an anomaly in the system, because the system isn't made for independent artists to succeed, which is why, like, you know, up until this point, I've not been on a single playlist. Not a single playlist. All the streams that I do get are by user playlists. So people that they'll go on my profile, they'll find the song, they'll add it to their own playlist. Okay.
1.3 million.
Yeah, without a single editorial playlist besides actually the French song went on Quebec Pop, which is a very small playlist, and it's like wasn't even there for long enough to get streams from. But you know, and I feel like as an independent artist, the system is built against you, because if you're able to make it as easily, like you said, chance rapper is the exception, not the rule, then at that point it annuls and undoes years of infrastructure to build what it is that you build. And so as an independent artist, there's like a compromise that you need to decide to make, and when you're going to make it, where it's like, I'm going to allow my art to be listened on volume, and I'm going to expose that on a wider scale, because by myself, there's a roof that I can't hit.
No.
Really?
Disagree.
Okay.
That's like, because unless you get into a huge level, unless you're talking, 40 million Instagram followers and you're going to sell out these huge, the only thing that a record label is doing for you is being a middleman between them and you. Whoever them is, the distributor, the album art guy, the whatever. If you're in a community where you know artists and you know producers and you know people in video and you know graphic designers, they know that people, it's only about relationships. If you can build your own world and build your own connections, build your own relationships, then those evolve and do whatever you want. You can get on a Spotify or whatever playlist you want if you've got the right relationship. The label just has those relationships with you. And the thing about labels is too, like, someone that works at Sony probably also worked at Universal, and someone working at Universal probably worked at this place, and like it's we're talking about ancestors. So it's just like everyone. So
it's the same people.
It's the same people, man. And just like I trust yourself, because clearly you've trusted yourself until now. You've made the right choices. So the signing the record feels great. Go for it. But like, don't ever feel the pressure of having to. Ever. You're going to, and you'll sign a good deal. But like, don't feel the pressure. Even if a label says it's now right, it's not true.
Man, I appreciate that. That's just because I saw that you had like this knee-jerk reaction of like, almost like you're telling me like, John, it's not what you think it is.
No, but I know people who signed shit too soon and got really screwed. Who were super excited, and I was like, oh, I spent that $15,000, and now I got a job at Starbucks to pay my bills while I write my fourth album that I owed the label. So it's just like, don't get yourself in that hole. As independent as you can be, as owning of every piece that you can. Like you had mentioned, like buying your catalog. Like that means they own the masters of your catalog. Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's like a short-sighted. It's a short-sighted way of like what I get you're saying is it's a short-sighted way of underselling your potential and cashing in today on what might be worth a lot more.
If you're nobody today and they want to offer you this, you've done it by yourself. Yeah. You could easily get to step B, C, D by yourself. Maybe it might take you a little longer, maybe get a little more tired. If you own everything that you do up until that point,
that's a crazy way of looking at it.
Except you sell your catalog now, and then they also own everything you do for the rest of it.
Interesting. Yeah, because I guess in the position I'm in now, it's like I know the expenses I incurred to put myself in this position.
It's expensive.
You know, and you're like, okay, more money equates to more growth, because that's, whether it's through ads, whether it's just through opportunities, whether it's through creating content, that's what really puts you in a position to be able to grow the way you want to grow. And so you're thinking like, at the end of the day, if the label is a resource, the more of that resource you have, the more it ultimately equates into...
You're the resource for the label. They're using you. You're not using them.
Wow.
When you sign a record,
no matter what artist, you would say that dynamic happens.
100%.
Interesting.
100%.
Interesting.
Like Ariana Grande is in a great position. People still own your publishing. It's not like do as much for yourself for as long as you possibly can, because you clearly killed it up until now. So I'm not concerned.
Oh man, I really appreciate that.
I appreciate you having me here, man, to talk, and I just think you're a super interesting human being. I think your music is really cool. And I can't wait to see what the next 7 months and 3 million, whatever else streams.
We'll do a check-in and see. Imagine like we go back into this conversation and it's like, damn it, John, I never told you. But it'll still be like an opportunity to reset. I'm not saying I'm doing all those things. Man, just rewatching that kind of gives me goosebumps just to think how much has happened over such a short period of time, and it's all thanks to you. Thanks to the people who are watching, to the people who are listening, to the people who bought merch when it was time to buy merch, so that I was able to even release a second EP, and now I guess as we're prepping for the third one, and I'm just excited to see what's next, and hopefully we'll be able to have Zach a year from now and just look back at what 2021 brought, or what will bring, and see if I I was gonna say if I do end up signing the John Mayer album deal, but I don't think anybody would ask me to do a 10-year deal. But no, just kidding. But thank you so much for watching, and next Wednesday we'll have a new episode, and so I'm excited. Thank you so much. Have a great day.